Hello, and welcome to another session on using Blender 2.79 for video editing. Today we're going to dive into the world of motion tracking with a very specific use case example. So with motion tracking, you can do lots of stuff. The idea is that you get Blender to identify different features that are inside the video, like this guy's eye or his ear, and then follow that feature throughout the entire video. And what you end up with is a tracking marker, which you can then use for other purposes. So those reasons for doing tracking could include 2D stabilization. Like if you have like a shaky camera and you want to make it nice and steady, you could use the marker for some kind of rotoscoping. Like if you wanted to attach a text label or image next to something as it passes by on screen. For this example, for what I want to show you, it's basically to automate the manual work that we did in the last video of animating your mask, right? So at the end of the last video, which was all about animating a mask, I went through an example of animating this mask around Agent 327's face, all the way up till this point there. It's only about 20 seconds of the video. I counted up the number of changes I made, almost 60 different keyframes that I had to set. 60 keyframes in 20 seconds, 3 keyframes per second. That's a lot of keyframes. So, if you have already gone through that process with some of your videos, going frame by frame, adjusting the position of the mask, you realize that takes a lot of time. And wouldn't it be nice if Blender could do some of that work for you? Well, yes, it can. Because if you can get it to track that thing that you need to apply a mask to, well then after you've created that tracking marker, then you can combine the two. You can join them up so that the mask will follow the marker. And then you can, after that, you just need to tweak the position of the mask a little bit, maybe grow or shrink it as necessary. But the basic path that the mask follows, that'll be done for you by Blender. Okay, so with that introduction about tracking in general, let's get into the demonstration. I will not be doing it with this video because although we can track, we're going to have to tweak a bunch of settings, and I just want to show you a simple example to get started. We'll get back to this video in a future session. So I am going to start by going to File, New, and reload the startup file, and I'll go into motion tracking. Alright, so motion tracking screen layout is now open. And like before, when we were creating masks, the first step is to open the video file that you want to work with. So let me go find it. Okay, and now that it's loaded up, things have changed in terms of what we can see. So let's go through things again. So this is where you can go to just look at the different markers that have been created in like an overview. For what we are about to do, where we're taking a single point and we're going to track that one point, we don't need that. Over here is if you wanted to, do some 3D stuff along with it. Again, the purpose of this is just to give you an introduction to tracking, and then the follow-up to this will be how to use that tracking marker with a mask. So we don't need this part either. So I'm just going to just resize that. And so now we are left with this thing, just like the graph editor. And it'll let us see the horizontal and vertical motion of our marker. It might come in handy and might give you an indication where something might have gone wrong in the tracking. But in this particular video file, we won't have any problems at all. So I'll just minimize that for now, and I can open it up again later. Okay, and over here we've got our properties editor. We can just leave that alone. One other thing I want to adjust before we get started is just bringing up this a little bit so I can see my timeline editor. And that leaves this larger area here, which is our movie clip editor, where we're going to do all of the work. This is the same one that we used for creating masks, and it's already set for tracking. So we don't need to go into here and change that. We're just going to leave that. So let's talk about what we can see in this view. I'm going to stretch this over, and I am going to use the mouse wheel. Actually, I'm just going to hit the home key, zoom that out. So the goal for today is that we are going to create a tracking marker that will follow this foot of the microphone, because I tested it. It works well with all the default settings. So it's a good starter example. All right. So over here on the left side, we've got this region with different settings, different items in it. You can see along the left-hand side, we've got different tabs. There's track, solve, grease pencil. For what we're doing, we only need to worry about track. So I'm going to stay on that. And let's just go top to bottom. We have at the start here the clip panel. What we can do here right now, we can click on set scene frames. As you can see here, it's a new scene. Of course, by default, we have 250 frames for us. So that's not the length of the video file. We can easily set it just by clicking this button. So I'll go ahead and click that. And there you go. It has changed to 415. Okay, let's scroll down a bit. Over here under marker, this is where we can add a marker. If you were to click on this, and I'll do that now, then you just click anywhere within the video to place a marker, like so. So now you can see I've got that little tiny white box. That's our marker. But I am going to show you how to delete it, which is actually just there. And I'll show you another way once I've deleted that. Another way to add a marker using shortcuts is by holding down on the control key and left clicking where you want the marker to go. So like I said, I wanted to create a marker to track this foot. So I'm going to click right on that foot. And there we go. There's that little white box. I'll just zoom in a bit and we can see it better. There we go. But let's continue over here. I'm going to scroll down a bit. Okay, so under tracking settings, now here's where it's a bit confusing. Let me expand this out and expand out the region on the right. And I'll just scroll this down, and you can see we also have a tracking settings over here. This took me a long time to understand what is the difference between these two. And it's actually very simple. On the right hand side, these are all the settings, the options associated with the currently selected tracker. The tracking settings on this side, this is where you can go to set options for any future markers that you create. So if you wanted to, if you were going to create a whole bunch of markers and you want them to all have the same settings that are different from the defaults, you would make changes here first before you start clicking around here to add your markers. So what are the settings? Well, I don't want to get into them right now because, like I said, we can get a perfect tracking with this video using just the defaults. So I'll explain these when we need to change them. Let's keep going, scrolling down further, and this is the last bit over here, track. This is basically the control panel. These are the buttons that you can use to do the tracking. So this is the main one, the one that looks like a play button, and it says right there, track selected markers. So for every single marker that you have selected right now, it'll try to track it forwards frame by frame. You can see there's what looks like a rewind button because Blender actually lets you go in both directions. Here, this button over here, which looks like a fast forward, means do the tracking, but just for one single frame. When tracking gets difficult, things aren't working well. By that, I mean like the tracking is always kind of messing up and it loses the focus on what you were trying to track and it starts tracking something else. Then this is one easy way of just going like frame by frame. Like, how is Blender doing? Is it doing okay each frame? And clear, for these buttons for clearing, like if you had already done some tracking but you didn't like what the results were, you click on where it started messing up and click this button and it'll clear out the tracking from that point on. You could do that, you could clear forwards or backwards, but I typically don't. I just tweak some values and then I just click the play button, the track selected markers button again, and that usually works for me. You can see there also the shortcut for that is Control T. All right, so let's jump back to the beginning and let's look over here to the top. Again, with this right hand region, so these things are specific to this one selected marker. So the very first thing is this field that you can use to name the track. If you had more than one, that's a very good idea. We only have one, but I'm going to go ahead and rename it anyway to foot because that's what it is. And this section here, this box is giving us a view into what Blender can see. And it is essentially what Blender is looking at when it's trying to do the tracking. Remember I said I wanted to track the foot, and how, generally speaking, when you want to track something, you want to select an area within the video that has it's a very distinguishable feature. So as you can see from here, what we're looking at is just basically like a dark mess. So what we can do is we can take our marker and resize it. We can make it bigger so that it captures the entire foot, the entire thing, so that it's a much nicer thing to try to follow along in the video. To do that, you can press the letter S, just like with masks, to scale it. So I'll press S, and now I can just move the mouse to change the size of the box. There we go. And now I can press G, again, like with masks, I press G to grab and shift it so that now it's right about in the middle. Okay? The other things you can do is work directly with these little vertices here if you wanted to. I typically don't, but you can. You can just left click on them and drag them around if you wanted to adjust the shape of the marker. Again, I typically don't, and I know I don't have to for this example, so I'm going to press Control Z to undo those actions. And you could also rotate if you wanted to. You could take that and rotate and scale it if you wanted to, but again, I don't have to, and I usually don't, so I will press Control Z to undo that, just letting you know it's possible. These other things I don't typically deal with, so I'm just going to skip all the way down to over here under Tracking Settings. Again, just to reiterate that these are the settings specific to this tracking marker. So again, like I said, we don't need to change any of these things. The tracking will work fine without changing anything, just to leaving everything at the defaults. So let's keep going. So we go down to the display panel over here, and one thing that's kind of fun to turn on is lock to selection. When you click on that, your view of your video is fixed on the marker. So wherever the marker is, wherever Blender thinks it should be tracking, that'll always be in the same point as you go through the video. So if it changes, what we'd expect to see is that this thing will always stay like right here in the center of the screen as we go through the video. So I'm going to leave that on and keep going down. And here we go. The last thing I wanted to talk about in terms of things to turn on is this search option here. Let me turn that on, and you can see what it is it's a box around your marker. The idea being that as Blender goes from frame to frame, it's going to look within this box for something that matches the marker from the current frame. So whatever's in the current or the current frame or the keyframe, we'll talk about that later. But basically, what's in the box, it's only going to look within this area, right? So so one example of where tracking might fail is if there's all of a sudden a really fast motion and your feature like jumped to some position outside of this box. To try to account for that, you can adjust the size of the box to make it larger, but I think that's going to slow things down, and we don't need it, so I'll bring it back down. This one really doesn't move much. Okay, and I think the only other thing to talk about right now is footage information. If you wanted to, it's just information. It just lets you know the dimensions and how many frames that video file has. So handy feature. I used to open up the video file inside of the video sequence editor just to get this information until I realized I can just see it right here. Okay, so that's it. Before we do the tracking, I want to show you something. I want to zoom out, and I'm going to position this over here, and I just want to scrub through the video real quick just so you get a sense of what's going to happen. And just actually, you know what? So we don't confuse things, I'm going to turn off lock to selection. Okay. So as I'm scrubbing through, you can see that, yeah, it's one of those shaky cam videos. So this microphone is moving around, but not a crazy amount, right? And the other thing to notice is that the camera, it was not moving towards or away from the subject. So what that means is the size of the thing we're trying to track, that little foot, doesn't change in the video. If you get those sorts of changes when you look at your video, then the defaults probably won't work well for you. But in this case, yeah, it moves around. It moves left, right, up, down, but it stays in about the same place from the camera. And that's a good thing for these default settings. Okay, so with all that said, let's click the button to get it to track. So I'm just going to click it now, and I'm just going to sit back and relax and have a sip of water. Oh, actually, no. Before I do that, I should mention, so this little thing here, this is a nice little indicator to show you how far along it is in terms of tracking. And over here, we got a nice little percentage progress bar there as well. And I guess I should also talk about that red thing that you can see there. So the red is giving you an indication of where the marker was in the previous frames. So like that little trail is like the path of it. And I guess now that we're pretty much done, maybe now would be a good time to pull this back down so we can see the graph editor. And I'm going to zoom that out and shrink that a bit. So the idea of being over here is that it's just more or less showing you the motion, like the different colors. I think it was like the green is showing horizontal and the red shows vertical, or maybe I got that mixed up. But it's not something I typically use, so that's why I'm very fuzzy on it. Yeah, so you can see there are some spots here where there's a lot of big dips, and when we look at it over here, you can see that, yeah, that's where there's a lot of motion happening there. But yeah, I can't say much more about that. I don't really use that much. Maybe in a future video I can tell you more about it. And one thing that I didn't mention, or it didn't point out, is that up here, yeah, like I said, this is a view into what Blender sees. So as you can see, if I scrub along, now that the tracking is complete, you can see that it's pretty much staying in there all the time. I mean, we could already see that there, but we can really see it over here, even when it gets blurry. Like some spots over there, like right that, what was that? Like that gets totally blurry, but it's still able to recognize that as the foot of the microphone. And there we go, and that's complete. Now if I jump to the middle, and let me zoom in a little bit here. As I said, while it was working, so the red, this trail of dots, that indicates where this feature was, where the marker was in prior frames. The blue is where it's going to be based off of what it's the tracking that's already been completed. So if I just use the right arrow key to go frame by frame, you'll see that this box is going to move upwards in this direction. So let's go ahead and do that. and then more blue dots appear because it is showing you a constant number of positions, past and future, right? So I guess just one last thing I wanted to show you is I'm going to turn that option back on, lock to selection. All right, and I'll just hit the play button. So you can see this is another way you can be watching to see how things move, because it looks pretty good, right? Like when we have it zoomed in like this, it almost, I mean, except for some of the fuzziness and things, it looks pretty stable, because that's what it's doing, is it's got it fixed on the marker being the foot, and that's working really well. But you can tell by the trails that, yeah, it's actually moving around quite a bit, but Blender did a good job in tracking it from start to finish. Okay, so that's it for this video, this introduction on how tracking works, how you can use it to create a tracking marker. In the next video, we're going to talk about how you can combine this with a mask, so you don't have to do as much animating of masks. And yeah, that's coming up next, so look forward to it. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please do give it a like and subscribe so you can see more content. And that's it for now. We'll see you next time. Bye now.